This is the Penn State Football Recruiting Show, the BWI Live Recruiting Show. But today we're discussing the past, present, and future of the Nittany Lions. NFL Draft coming up tonight. Abdul Carter and Tyler Warren expected to be not only first-round picks, but likely top 15 picks, maybe top 10 picks in the NFL Draft. We were at practice last night, so the current football team on the docket for what we saw, what we heard, what we smelled. And, of course, we have recruiting. Ryan Snyder, Sean Fitz, the best in the business when it comes to discussing and informing the audience on what's going on with Penn State football recruiting. Big weekend, one of the biggest weekends on the calendar, the blue-white game coming up on Saturday. So that's all coming up here on the show. But just off the bat, I'm just going to rip the Band-Aid off and remind you a couple things here in the intro. So first thing is our contest for giving away a subscription to the BlueWhiteIllustrated.com is wrapping up this week. We're going to close entries, and all you've got to do is hit the subscribe button on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. Super easy, completely free to you. It's almost calorie free. Just click the button on your phone, your computer, your tablet, whatever you're watching, and then you'll be entered to win a subscription. We're giving away 5 winners. Next Tuesday, we're going to announce those winners, but we're closing the registration this weekend. Of course, like the video, that always helps us here for this particular conversation. And we've got a live show coming up at 1 p.m. this weekend before the blue-white game. To get into all the details, we'll be live outside the Bryce Jordan Center like we are for every Penn State home game, all that great stuff. So that's all off the table. We've discussed all those things. Let's get into some of the things that I think are the biggest conversation points. And we'll start with the NFL draft because I want to have this as a recruiting-centric conversation to start the show. Ryan, when you talk to prospects and you talk to players that are out there in the world thinking, maybe I want to commit to Penn State, how much do these moments matter to have a guy like Abdul Carter maybe go 2 or 3 or 4 overall? How much does it matter that Tyler Warren is a number 1 pick, or maybe somebody else sneaks into the top 50 for Penn State? How much does that matter for the actual boost in recruiting?
Yeah.
How you doing?
Good. I was wondering what you smelled last night, but we can discuss that later, considering it's April in State College. You know what those farms are spreading up there. Anyway, it matters a lot, especially, Abdul Carter, Tyler Warren, right? They are on the mind of a lot of prospects right now, and especially defensive end. I mean, that's something that Penn State, or it's a position that Penn State has regularly produced NFL talent now. What was this, like the 6th or 7th one? I feel like last handful of years that are projected to be a top 100 or so pick. So, day 1 or day 2, that's a position that Penn State's cranking out a lot of talent, and it's paying dividends, I believe, for them on the recruiting trail. So I think that's important. I think tight end is also another spot that Penn State's going to keep getting awesome talent at pretty much no matter how the class shakes out, or, what the talent pool is. When we just saw Luke Sorensen come in from California this past week, mainly because of how talented or how productive Penn State has been at producing NFL tight ends. So it gets brought up for sure. But, those 2 positions specifically, without a doubt.
Is my mouth now not dubbed over? Can you guys see me and hear me in time now? Okay, Wonderful. Based on your initial reaction, I was like, something's wrong here. So I just did a quick reset. Fitz, how you doing? Just kind of similar question. What do you think the value of these moments in the long term? How do you build momentum in recruiting, and how do you use something like this to land an elite recruit at defensive end or at tight end?
Where we're at right now, especially with tight end, for example, we say that the position recruits itself, right? Like, because they are on a roll. They've done great things. They've done, it's kind of like an assembly line. It's going to be 4 picks in 5 years or in 5 drafts with a first rounder, 2 second rounders, and a 4th rounder that started 11 games before he got hurt as a rookie. Pretty good, right? So we say that it recruits itself, but it doesn't get there on its own. This has been a ridiculous run for Penn State in terms of identification of talent, recruitment of talent, development of talent, and then basically gladiators battling it out. You think of what's in that room and what's left that room, and some pretty good players left that room, but the level is so high. Defensive end, you can make an argument the same way there. Like, they've gone about it differently. You got Chop Robinson from the portal. You moved Abdul Carter from linebacker. It's about getting your best athletes at one of the most important positions on the field. And yes, that continues to I don't want to say pay dividends, because recruiting is kind of a different game now than it was even when Abdul Carter was recruited, because of the money aspect of things. But yes, that sort of prestige. You had a first rounder last year at defensive end. You had a first rounder this year at defensive end. Adisa was a second rounder. That's not too long ago. You've got that same sort of assembly line, and yes, it certainly helps. Now, obviously, you want to build every position that way. It's not how it works in college football, but that's the goal. Alabama during their run had done a really good job with that. But yeah, you have found yourself in a position where you throw these comps out when you're talking to prospects, when you're talking to families. You throw these comps out and say, this is what we produce at this certain position. Why wouldn't you want to come to Penn State? And I think that is the biggest sell right there. Is, yes, maybe you're not going to make the most money up front, but Abdul Carter is going to get a nice little check whenever he's with the Giants, the Patriots, whomever picks him this evening. So that is your pitch. That has to be your pitch. And I think that you get a certain type of kid because of it. Shamar Stewart's going to go early in the draft tonight, right, T. Frank?
Yeah. I think he's going to be in the first round for sure.
He's going to be in the first round.
Yeah.
Did he do anything in college?
No.
Okay. Well, he was brought into Texas A&M as a complete freak athlete, and he's going to leave Texas A&M as a first-round pick, mostly because of being a freak athlete. That is where he's found.
And that's the concern. That's why he's not.
Exactly. That's why he's not. But the development has to be where Penn State makes these guys their money. Abdul, there was one person that made Abdul a 5-star prospect. That was Abdul's father. Abdul's father was over the moon about him, and guess what? He's one of the very few parents that we've come across that has been right about that. He was absolutely.
I was wondering where you're going with that.
Yes. Yeah. But hey, man, I actually sent him a DM last night. He sent me a DM a couple of years ago that says he's going to be a top 10 pick. He's going to bring back linebacker. James Franklin is going to develop him into a top 10 pick. And guess what? He was right. So you have to look at those things. And I know, like I said, it's different than when Abdul was recruited, but you have to look at all those things as a means to an end, and they did so, and they are reaping the rewards, rightfully so.
Yeah, and I'll just underline the development part. Abdul Carter against West Virginia was not a good defensive end. Abdul Carter against Boise State and Notre Dame was the best football player on the field. Stop. And he had one arm, and that's because he put in the time and the effort. He had to be able to learn and be coached. But Deion Barnes did an amazing job with him last year, and they did a great job of honing on what he could do and developing those moves and that skill set to be a devastating pass rusher by the end of the season. And that's why he is where he is and not down with with some of the other project developmental defensive ends in the first round, because the athleticism has been there, right? That's been their part of the whole story. Let's move on. I want to talk about a couple things here to start off and then get into the recruiting conversation. But this one, again, affects the team specifically in a big way. And it's not something that has anything to do with what happened on the field yesterday at practice or the blue-white game. It, of course, is the House settlement that's going to affect all of college football here in at some point whenever it's settled. But Judge Claudia Wilken yesterday says she will not approve of any settlement until there is better clarification and a grandfathering in of roster limits, not just a hard cutoff whenever this is settled. So the 105 rule will not go into effect, at least as far as the way she phrased it last night. Fitz, I'm just going to come back to you. How much breathing room does that give Penn State, and how much does this change the next 2 months for the team? Let's just say.
I mean, holy crap, we found some common sense in here, didn't we? This is unbelievable.
Careful, don't let it get away.
Well, the NCAA pushback was, well, teams have already started cutting guys, so it would be, that would not be a good thing to do to walk back on this 105. Come on, guys, what are we thinking here? There are hundreds of college football student athletes who are, not going to play pro football, who are going to, some of them still paying for their education, and you're just kind of thrown them to the wolves. There's no sort of, and this has been a train I've been on for a while, so it's part of a bigger rant, but there's no sort of safety net for guys, even in the portal. The portal closes tomorrow. How is that going to work? When you were going to cut 25 guys, and where were they going to end up? What's going to happen here? So grandfathering the no-brainer decision of this all. It was just, I mean, it's big. It is what it is. It was a race to the money from the NCAA to figure out how all this stuff was going to come together. By getting there quicker, they thought that it would save them more money, essentially. So, so that is good because it's such an integral part of college football. It's still probably going away, but to pull the rug out from those guys that are on campus right now, not even like the fourth year guys and the fifth year guys that have been there long enough to get their degree, but you've got a bunch of redshirt freshmen who are just kind of there, like floating in as anonymous as they could be, with no real place to go. Like that none of this ever made any sense. So
yeah,
making them do that, putting the wood to them and saying, hey, we're not going to approve this unless it goes through, never made any sense. So I think this is a big deal. It's going to, I don't want to say keep the roster intact, but Penn State's got 4 months until they play a football game. And if you can have the roster at 120 at that point, that's great. Like, I do see it gradually going down, and I do see maybe some sort of wiggle room with the practice squad with, just an extra numbers or things like that. But where we were at with the 105 made no sense just to chop it off. Like, didn't make any sense at all.
Ryan, do you have any thoughts on this? I don't know how closely you've been following along with this, but I know it impacts, what Penn State can do in recruiting and how they have to massage the numbers. So I guess, how does this affect that side of things?
We don't know yet. Like, we have to see how it ultimately gets settled. I think, like as Sean said, it will be some sort of a grandfathering situation where that'll steadily decline over the coming years. But until the details are finalized, it's hard for us or Andy Frank or anybody up there in Lash to really know the details. But I think it is pretty clear that they're not going to have to cut their walk-ons immediately, and it is going to get what's the right word, funneled down, I guess you'd say, eventually. Which, I mean, I feel like you do have to have some sort of limit, because if not, I mean, it's just going to allow the big time programs to stockpile talent again, and I don't think that's what you want in this situation. At the same time, the financial aspect would hint at otherwise, but that's kind of the fear and a part of the reason why they wanted to set those limits. So we got to see. Hopefully we'll find out here in a couple of weeks. I know, I assume at least those in Lash building and every Division I staff wants to get this sorted out soon, because this is dragging out longer than I think many of them would hope.
Ryan, can I jump in here? It's not only walk-ons though. Like, you have walk-ons that are going to play ahead of scholarship guys right now. So you would be cutting scholarship guys to get to 105, which, it's all part of a bigger issue that you're going to have to deal with in the next couple of years to figure out if your guys that are on scholarship from 85 to 105, if they're going to have a spot the next year. Like that's all coming down the pike. But but where we're looking at with this right now is, like, you can't cut Ryan Barker, you can't cut Gabe Nwosu, you can't cut those guys. Like, it's all crazy. And Penn State's done a pretty good job of managing its scholarship roster and building its roster out to begin with. And there's still attrition that is due, because it's natural. It's only natural. But you're looking at a roster where you just kind of have to flip a coin and be done with it. And that's just was never possible. So finally some thought came into the room, I guess. And we'll see where we stand 2 years from now. But yeah, this is a big step, I think.
So we'll be following that along, of course, and we'll give you all the updates as we get them. And if BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, if you want more than just a once a week conversation on these particular topics, maybe twice a week, depending on when Nate shows up on the show. But we'll have continued coverage of this, because it's very important to recruiting and to the team, as well as we've outlined here. But you guys mentioned financials are always a big part of this conversation. It's not just about the players, it's about the money. It's what is driving a lot of these decisions lately. But if we're honest, that drives all of our decisions. Every single thing in life is in some way influenced by money. And if you want your future to be influenced in the positive sense by money, Fitz like that transition, or he's laughing at something different off camera.
A little bit of both. Yeah.
Check out My Perfect Franchise. Andy Ludicky and My Perfect Franchise can help you with that next stage of your life. So who is this for? It is not for you who just graduated from college and you don't have any money. This is for somebody who's been working, has expertise, has the financial backing to take away all the shackles of working in middle management in somebody else's business, making money for somebody else, and making it for yourself. Andy can help you start your own business, buy a small business, or buy into a franchise. That's what he knows how to do. That's what he spent almost a decade doing, and that's where he wants to help you through that process. It is completely free to you for the franchise consulting at Andy at myperfectfranchise.net. So if you know, I heard people talking about chicken the other day outside practice, different chicken brands. I don't know the difference between one chicken sandwich and another chicken sandwich, but if you have a great idea about fast food, the industry, all those things, and you want to buy into a franchise, Andy can help you with that. You could be the next chicken connoisseur of State College or wherever you may live. So 404-973-9901. He is a good guy and somebody that we've gotten to know a little bit, and he seems like he genuinely wants to help you and not just get you into any situation so that he can continue to put people just into businesses to say that he did that. That's not his goal. His goal is to have success stories on the other side. So get on his calendar, have a conversation with him, and see if you can change the next aspect of your life with My Perfect Franchise. Let's get into what we saw last night with Penn State practice updates. I'm just going to go ahead and roll the supercut from yesterday, the video that I got. Fitz, you were on the defensive side of the ball. I know that there was a little bit less going on that side, but what were the major takeaways from you? Either who you talked to, what you saw, maybe you said the conversations after practice. What did you find in our final open practice before the blue-white game on Wednesday night?
Yeah, they made a seg to some of that outside block, the perimeter blocking drills that you'll probably roll here soon. And we looked around the defensive side of the field, and it was the defensive tackles and ends just going through just some hand fighting stuff. And it was like the Travolta meme where he just walks in the room. There's nothing there. So nothing essentially going on. It was good to see them back outside. It's great for photos, but it's even good for space. You look at kind of the same themes that we've seen throughout the spring, and linebacker continues to be thin. I think they'll be fine. Tony's not out there right now, and Dakari Nelson to a lesser extent. So you'll get some numbers back at some point, but you saw Anthony Specca move up into that role that Tamir Robinson has been in, and I don't think there's much of a change there, to be honest with you. Specca probably a better linebacker. I think Tamir has a lot of upside as an athlete, as a guy that can cover some space, but when you look at instincts and things like that, Specca is right in there. So I don't think we saw much change there. Interesting, they broke off the nickels a little bit more that we saw. And I think that's going to be a big part of the defense. That's kind of the theme of how this is going to come together. We talk about linebacker depth, but Penn State's going to play two linebackers most of the time this year. It's going to be essentially a 4-2-5, a nickel base, if you want to call it that. And I think that matters when you're talking about both sides of that. But also, there's no Zion Tracy right now. That matters in the nickel. There's no King Mack right now. That matters in the nickel. So you're looking at a defense that was probably missing a few pieces, but should be okay. It's very interesting. We talked to Deion Barnes afterwards, and so much of what he's dealing with right now is the makeup of both defensive line positions, because you've got some experience in starters at both spots with Zariah Fisher and Dennis Sutton. Denai's not out there right now. But you've also got Zane Durant and Alonzo Ford. Alonzo Ford's not out there right now. But then it's a big cutoff to freshmen and, redshirt freshmen and some younger guys. So they're going to have to grow up on the run this year. There's a lot of talent there, but it's just a big break in experience. You don't realize what you've got until it's gone, especially with those defensive tackles like Devon J. Thomas and Keziah Izzard, getting valuable reps and getting all that experience and putting it to play there. So I think that's something that's an ongoing storyline that we're going to have to continue to watch as the season approaches. Confident that there's talent there. It's just there's a big gap between talent and experience, and we'll see what happens with that group. And confident, well coached, and all that sort of thing. But there's no substitution for live game reps, and those guys, a lot of those guys don't have it.
Yeah, we talked quite a bit yesterday about the defensive tackle position on the show. Greg and I have, I think, a good number of concerns, given what you just said of even if you're very talented and you know what to do, the first time you see something that you haven't seen before, probably going to catch you off guard. And if that goes for a 20-yard run, that's a 20-yard run. There's no like that learning experience went as an L for the defense. And, those kind of things might, who knows how they affect the upcoming season. You saw a lot of what I saw here on the YouTube channel. If you're listening on the podcast version, you can check out this section of the show if you want to see the highlights. I think I'm going to put out like a supercut of all of the different highlights that we have, like a 10 minutes worth of highlights from the whole season. Got a lot of good stuff this spring. So the first time around, we saw perimeter blocking drills. I felt like it was a little bit more even. And yesterday I did not. Kind of felt like the defense took it to the receivers. And part of that was because it was safeties versus receivers. And so, some bigger, more physical players.
Who should win those battles, by the way.
Who should, right, exactly. Who should win those battles. Also, the starters weren't taking many reps. Kyron Hudson took 2 reps, but outside of that, no Liam Clifford, none of the veteran players, and Kobe Howard wasn't there yesterday. And that's the part I think I found most notable was I didn't notice he wasn't there until we got into the blocking drills, and I'm like, wow, these receivers are getting pushed around a little bit. That was not what happened last week. And I went, oh, wait, I haven't seen 3 out here throwing guys to the ground. And I just think that's indicative of the impression he's made so far this spring of not just the receiving, but the physicality, because it's interesting who shines in these drills. So Caden Saunders has struggled when going through some of these blocking drills, but is very good in the pass routes and getting separation against other players. So you have a receiver room that you can take one thing from in any drill, and it will be different the next week. So I don't know necessarily if you want to say like, oh, they're going to be terrible at blocking because some of the guys that are 175 pounds or 185 pounds in Lyric Samuel's case going up against grown men, essentially, like on the other side. It felt like that was one where the context was this is going to be hard for the receivers to win some of these battles. But on the flip side, Dejon Lane going up against Kyron Hudson, if you saw it there, was definitely the battle of the day where you got 2 guys that were going into these drills with full speed and confidence and violence. That was the main thing from the receivers that I felt like Marcus Higgins was trying to coach them on is don't hesitate. Like the part of blocking you're missing right now, like, yes, we want you to go in with the proper technique, get your hands inside, etc. But go hit somebody. Don't wait. Don't catch the guy. And so, that's, I think, underscoring some of the young guys in there still thinking about the technique and the fundamentals and not playing football up to their size or their potential or whatever you might want to call it that. The good news, Fitz, we've been talking about some of the guys missing. Dennis Sutton not out there. Nolan Rucci came back for the first time. Of course, James Franklin was asked about that later. He's, said it wasn't necessarily a big deal of what was going on with him, kind of a nagging thing. And then did underscore, like, missed time is missed time, so he's got to have a big summer, but it's good to have him out there at practice. I think he said he was only doing individual drills. Is that a guy you'd expect to see this weekend? He's technically back. I kind of got the same idea. Like, I don't expect to see a lot of him in the blue-white game.
No, they brought back him. They brought back Cam Wallace, Caleb Artis, some guys that probably were close to coming back and just need to get them out there and get them a feel for the, how everything's going. So I don't really expect to see much of him. Of course, Egan Boyer not really in there anymore. So going to see a lot of young tackles. I think it's going to benefit those young guys, definitely. But a lot of Javen Williams, a lot of Garrett Sexton, Owen Alicini, those guys. More so than Rucci. You kind of know what you get with Rucci. Still, that's kind of where we're at. And I know we talked about this on the board this week, T. Frank. Someone asked if you're worried about it. So yes and no,
Sure.
Because they've got experience. You kind of know what they are. But at the same time, even him and Donka, not finished products. So they need more reps. They need refining. And like I said, those reps are going to benefit the younger guys undoubtedly. But at the same time, you like to see that be more ready going into the fall.
Yeah. So I think the best opportunity would be that fall competition in camp. As Phil Troutwine talked about a couple weeks ago, it's going to be a competition for that right tackle spot. So there's still that opportunity, and there's still time to grow and develop. But it's interesting what you begin to take for granted because you've seen it play out. But that's, football is a game where if you're not getting better, you're not. I don't love the idea if you're not getting better, you're getting worse, because that's not technically true. But like it is a perpetual improvement machine, and that's part of the conversation here. The other thing from practice I thought was interesting. talked to Andy Kolnicki afterwards. And basically I asked him, can you win a championship? Can you build an offense to be as explosive as you need to be if you are featuring backs and tight ends? And he said, yes. They did a study on championship winners over the years, and there is no blueprint for how that works. There's no blueprint for, you have to have X number of explosive plays from your receiver position, touches, all those things. He said distribution is important, but, I've been talking about here a lot, the idea that you need to have receivers lead the way, or at least be a major part of your passing game to have enough balance to win a championship. And basically he pushed back on that idea, saying you can have tight ends, you can have 3 running backs that lead you. That all those have been formulas for winning a championship. So I'm interested to see what form that takes this year and how those transfer receivers factor into the overall output of the offense, and how all of that balance, in an overused word, actually comes to fruition. Also, he didn't want to talk to me about how the offense is going to evolve. Unsurprising that he didn't want to talk about that.
I mean, 104 catches from Tyler Warren. They got to go somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And I think the tight ends will still be prevalent, but not that.
So any other thoughts from practice yesterday? I want to get Ryan back into the conversation. Obviously, knowing Ryan, he's sitting there on mute doing work, but I want any other things, Fitz, that stood out from you, or that you're thinking about going into the blue-white game from the football perspective before we get into the recruiting.
Nope. Just stay healthy. Get out the other side. I think that's the main thing. And we talked with James Franklin a little bit about the format, and it's definitely to keep people up, keep people healthy, and to give people a nice glimpse, like a nice sliver of what they want, which is football, but at the same time, keeping it above board.
Yeah. And I think it's going thud in the first quarter that he talked about, doing like the skeleton drills and things like that, giving the stars, the players, a chance to play a little bit before you get into the football. Football might be a good compromise between the two. Now, if you just want to see a bunch of people going around and knocking each other out, I don't know what to tell you. Football doesn't do that much anymore. Let's get into what's coming up this week and what happened previously with our spring visits, because this is the final week to get guys onto the campus and to see your program, make that last final best impression. The blue-white game, one of the biggest recruiting weekends of the year, and Ryan's been tracking all these things at bluewhiteillustrated.com. He's got a full list. I love it's always so well laid out of the players, their year, whether they hold a Penn State offer. Like, if you want to go to bluewhiteillustrated.com, get the full information, do it after we're done talking here. But the way to do that is to subscribe for $1. That's for the first week. And then you can decide if you want to join us for the rest of the spring and then into the summer and through a full year. It's well worth it just for Ryan's content alone. It's well worth it just for Fitz's content alone. But you get both of them. It's one of the best deals that you can get in football. So check it out, and we'll get into some of the comments and conversations here. So where do you want to start from the upcoming visitor list for the blue-white game, which I think a lot of fans probably want to focus on there, of the blue-white game and the visitors and the commitments that might happen from that? What's your take of the list and the overall impression you have of the quality of the players coming this weekend?
Yeah, so still have some work to do. I would say right now there's about 20 uncommitted, scholarship players expected to attend. That number will be higher. We're gonna work on that later today. I think that the big thing, or at least the players that kind of stand out to me, is that there's a handful of guys coming from outside of the region to attend this game. You have Ashari Charles coming up from Florida. You have Adam, is it Balagoon Alley, I believe, Sean? You've talked to him a little more than I have. Another linebacker coming up from Florida. And I think Brian Harris, too, another defensive lineman coming up from Florida. And we've seen that in the past for guys. I mean, don't get me wrong, they've had players come from all over the last couple of weeks. I mentioned Luke Sorensen earlier, coming out from California. But when guys are traveling, they tend to lean towards the spring game to get up here at this time of the year. And I think we're going to see a good bit of that. There's also a handful of 2027 guys I didn't even mention that are also traveling, I think, from Texas. I think there's a couple guys coming from Texas. But quality list, as there always is. I don't know if it'll be quite as big as we've normally seen. I've kind of gotten the impression that they feel good about the amount of players that they've had on campus throughout spring. Obviously, they will love guys to double up, triple up sometimes and come from multiple visits. But the amount of players that they had over the last handful of weeks has given me kind of the impression this might be a little bit smaller, at least from top end talent. Compared to maybe some previous blue-white games. And I think that's what Penn State wants, honestly. They want guys coming to practices more than the true blue-white game. But lots of good talent. I mean, I think Luke Wafel is the guy you kind of have to start with and circle. Of course, Owen Wafel's younger brother. Whole family will be up this weekend. Talked about him a lot, right? I think if you guys are paying attention, Ohio State and Texas are the top competitors here. And, Penn State should have a great opportunity to land him. But those schools are obviously aggressive and top programs for a reason. So it's far from a done deal or anything like that. But Sean, I'll throw it to you. Is there anybody, specific you think we got to highlight this weekend?
I agree with you. It's a good list. It is like, I think Terry Wiggins kind of jumps out at me as a guy that makes a lot of sense for Penn State. You see where Penn State is at linebacker, and he kind of fits what you're looking for. They're probably one of those lengthy guys. He's also, and this is very funny because I think Penn State fans have convinced a lot of themselves that they're just going after athletes and not players that can play the position. Well, a bunch of those guys do both. And
why not both?
Yeah, I think Wiggins kind of fits that bill where I think people think he's just an athlete, but he's a really good football player. So Wiggins is interesting to me. Luke Wafel is, I think we would call him the headliner. Is that what we're doing right now? Is that what we're doing here?
I mean, Adam Balagunali too. Like, he's a really good linebacker prospect, and that's a position that Penn State's searching nationally for linebacker prospects. But yeah, I mean, he technically On 3 has him as a 3-star, but I think Penn State looks at him much higher than that.
Yeah, I can buy that. Brian Harris, defensive lineman from Mandarin in Jacksonville. Of course, John Mitchell, Anton Belgrave Shorter. He just picked up an Alabama offer this week. I think it's going to shake things up, but Penn State's on the schedule this weekend and in June for an official visit. That D-tackle board continues to expand. It looks fine. Like, it looks good. I know that there's they just picked one up this week in Isaac Chukwara. I'm sorry. I knew I was going to trip. Was I good? No,
not bad. Hey, he texted me back. He watched the video the other day and said we did a great job, T. Frank. So,
yeah,
round of applause, buddy. Round of applause.
We were worried about that. That was one that we were texting about, and you mentioned the pronunciation right before, and I was like, oh God, I would have completely messed that up. So thank you for that. And then I messed it up anyway. So, but the D-tackle board continues to be interesting. I have Alex Haskell, the guy that we're all watching for a potential decision, probably in May. But there's a bunch of guys that are still out there, but getting those guys up matters. Brian Harris is where we started the conversation, certainly matters. But yeah, I like that. I like the underclassmen list. And as we've mentioned, with the change in recruiting calendar, where you can go out in January and actually recruit the kid instead of just stopping by his school to say hello, where you can go out over the next couple of weeks. And Kenny Sanders has been on the road for 2 weeks now, a week and a half now.
Yeah, in and out. But yeah, for the most part,
he's racking up those frequent flyer miles. All this stuff matters, especially with the underclassmen. So you're starting to continue to build on that. And you've got folks coming in for official visits starting in May. So this calendar is just rolling through. And I think it's more productive in a sense, certainly more productive for the miles that you're putting in. But I think it's changed some things in terms of the calendar for some of these guys. And I'll be honest with you, they picked up Darryl Carey last week, Chukwara, and it's probably more action than we thought we would saw. We're kind of sitting there waiting for Haskell to commit, right? Or to decide, right? And then all these other guys sort of jump in line in front of him, which is kind of, it's a nice little pleasant surprise.
Yeah, I would have had the over under like 2.5 max, and Penn State's already at 5 technically if you include Khalil Taylor, 2027 wide receiver when it comes to commitment since the start of spring ball. And I don't know, there's no one specific person I have like circled for this specific weekend. I do think it's interesting that Grayson McHugh's coming back up on Friday. I don't think he's quite ready to do that yet. I would lean towards him still taking official visits, but at the same time, you just want the Notre Dame. I think a lot of people expect Notre Dame to be Penn State's top competitor. I think it's also notable Notre Dame has 5 offensive linemen already committed, right? So,
wow,
that plays a role in some things. So let's see how that visit goes. He's only going to be here Friday. He's not going to stick around for the blue-white game, which is fine. I mean, Penn State just needs to keep getting him on campus as much as possible because, for an in-state player who's, as high on their board as he is, to only have visited twice so far is kind of rare. We don't see that often as far as, for a player that Penn State really wants. So
Yeah.
I think it's a big to get him back up for a second time this spring. And, we'll see if anything happens in May, but he's certainly set for an official visit in June.
But it's worth noting, Ryan, that he's visited Penn State. This will be his second trip, right?
Yes. This spring. Yep.
Second trip this spring. So third trip overall. He's gone to Duke twice, Northwestern once, Boston College once, Notre Dame once, Rutgers once. He's not been well traveled. So when you say it's only been 2 visits or whatever, that's kind of with the silver lining because this kid's very green.
Right.
Process.
Right. And that's a good way to put it. I mean, he really just let's be honest, he blew up. I think he had Duke and Syracuse before Penn State. Penn State was in November, and really his recruitment has taken off since January. So that's a fair comment. And I just feel like I just feel like we've often see just more visits, more game visits and stuff like that over last year and things like that. But Grayson's really, his stock has really just taken off. Since
do you know where he is weight wise, Ryan? Just from the evaluation standpoint, I want to start with I don't
think he's that far off.
I think
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I really like him. I do think that strength is a huge issue for him on his film. He definitely needs to get bigger, and not even in the sense of all of Penn State's big athletic tackles need to get bigger. We've seen these guys come in as rangy, undersized guys, but they have that beef in the run game. He's aggressive, but I think the strength is a big important part to me. So I was curious if you have any update on any of that.
Yeah, I'm trying to double check here.
We have him at
280. But I texted him on April 11th and asked that, which is, I believe, right after his visit. He said 280. So I got to get this file updated.
But he's one of those guys. He camped as a tight end. So he is one of those guys that has grown up into a tackle. And that is why his recruiting took off late. It'll be interesting. You mentioned Notre Dame has 5 offensive line commits. One of them, Tyler Merrill, who is kind of the complete opposite of this, right? This guy is picking up offers as a big kid as a freshman. So you're looking at different trajectories there. It'll be interesting to track those guys and see who ends up I say ranked higher at the end. Obviously, the rankings don't matter. It's the production eventually when you get to college, but it'll be interesting to track both of those guys.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know he started as a tight end. That makes a lot of sense watching some of the stuff on film where I'm not surprised he's been kind of a slow developer. There's some hesitancy on film, and just knowing that he's young to the position, you should be very excited about Grayson McHugh is what I'm trying to say. Is there's a lot of talent there, and there's a lot of upside for a guy who is very new to the position. That offensive line, that tackle spot in this class feels pretty strong, even though they have, obviously they have a potential 5-star in Kevin Brown, but just the number of names. I know Jimmy Callis, one of our national guys, I think it was Steve, had a chance to catch up with him. We can talk about that in just a minute, but feels like they are lining up a lot of really good options for that tackle spot. So having Grayson McHugh a part of that is a big thing. I want to ask a follow-up question about Luke Wafel. How much, Ryan, do you get the sense of I'm coming to see my brother play and I'm coming to Penn State because I'm interested in Penn State?
I mean, I think seeing his brother play is probably the biggest thing, right? They were just here a couple weeks ago and they've circled for a while now. But look, I mean, let's not pretend that Penn State's not going to, take him to the Lash building and hang out with the family, have discussions throughout the day. I think they're staying the night too, which is always good to see, as far as giving more time. So it'll be a little bit of both, but certainly, his brother making his debut at Penn State, who's had a pretty good spring from what we understand. I think that's what has the family most excited for this week. And even Luke to some degree, they want to see his brother having a good transition. And look, that's critically important in this recruitment as well. Like the fact that how Owen enjoys those first couple. Sorry, I'm getting a phone.
No,
how he enjoys those first couple of months here will have a massive impact on whether Luke comes here or I think it'll be here, Texas or Ohio State, personally, one of those 3.
Yeah, I guess
it's not so much about Owen being here. It's about Owen's experience here because you look at the experience that he had at Michigan, and I don't know the details in terms of whether he liked it or not, but Michigan's not only
coaching changes.
Yeah, coaching
That's
changes,
what it was.
all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
All that stuff matters. And it's not so much about just being here and being with his brother as, hey, this guy has had a really good experience here so far, and he's reaping the benefits of being here. And I think that the younger brother could also do that. So I think that goes into it. And of course, just being happy. How much does that matter for these guys? I mean, the portal is full of guys who have found something other than what they were looking for, and maybe made a decision based on something other than what they were looking for. And now all of a sudden they're looking for another place that can give them what they're looking for. And it's just very all interesting watching all this come together.
I just wanted a little bit of context there, because when I was thinking about that, I saw Luke Wafel on the roster of people to expect, knowing he was just here. I listened to you guys follow the visits, and I was like, okay, like there's a head of steam here. This feels very good for Penn State. And then I wanted to, not get ahead of myself or not get too excited, because I wanted to make sure there is that kind of balance of understanding and I think you guys had laid it out really well of, that use that advantage and then make sure that advantage is actually a tangible part of the recruiting process. Guy that stood out to me again, and I just want to ask you about this one, is Davion Brown. Receiving recruiting went quiet for a little bit, and they're still looking for that third guy in the class after Jaquaden Guilford decommitted from the program. Wanted to get your thoughts on his situation with Penn State and where he sits right now with this upcoming visit, Ryan.
It's an interesting one. I think Michigan is certainly picking up momentum there. It feels like Michigan has momentum with Travis Johnson as well. We'll see how things shake out there. Travis Johnson also set Indiana and I think Virginia Tech kind of recently, which was kind of surprising to me. The Indiana one was at least with Travis Johnson. But we know Davion Brown has official visits with Penn State, Georgia, and Duke. I'll be curious to see where he's at on Georgia's board. It's something I've been kind of just waiting to dig on, because I felt like, I could ask it last month or even this month, and I don't know how much it really matters. It's really going to matter, seems like mid to late May, and where they stand then. I think absolutely if he's a full take at Georgia, they're going to be a player there, as will Michigan and as will Duke. I mean, he's been to Duke, I think 4 times now, at least 3 times. I think maybe his official will be his 4th, but Manny Diaz and them are serious contender there as well. So look, here's the one thing I'll say about this, and I don't know if I think we talked about this on the board, is when Davion Brown was putting out his top schools, he sent to me 2 days prior and did not include Penn State. And I remember sending it to Sean and being like, well, that's interesting. Did not expect that to happen. So, fast forward 12 to 24 hours later, then he does include Penn State in that list, which was always interesting to me, because I thought Penn State was maybe one of the favorites. And then to originally maybe not have them in that mix was certainly kind of grabbed my attention, raised some eyebrows, however you want to put it. But I think they are firmly in the mix, but I'm still kind of I have that in the back of my head, is why did you not originally kind of include them? And then I guess maybe had a discussion and then decided to include them. So I think a lot of it's just like the Georgia discussion, a lot of it's going to depend on where these classes stand here in a month from now, as far as sorting out Davion Brown. Absolutely, Michigan will take him. Michigan is way behind right now with recruiting, but a school like Georgia, they have absolutely plenty of options, and he's certainly a take for Penn State as well. But talk to me in mid-May.
He fits the kind of Matt Otten profile of recruit that Marcus Hagans has been looking for. It sticks with me when you have a conversation with somebody about, what are you looking for in a receiver? And he says, I want guys that are tough. I want guys that are going to, and from that mental perspective of working hard every practice and wanting to dominate, but a guy that's 6'1", 200, breaks tackles, explosive, on his level of competition. It feels like that would be a very good fit for Marcus Hagans and would kind of continue that. Of course, also a Virginia guy, so that also makes a lot of sense. But
the fact that
seems to fit.
The fact that Penn State just offered 2 2026 wide receivers has my attention right now. Hayden Moore committed to Minnesota. He's out of Florida. And Brian Williams, another Florida wide receiver, both picked up offers. I think it was last week. I wrote about it this week. Hayden Moore is going to take an official visit. We're working on Brian Williams and where things stand there. Although I have talked to Brian a little bit, and he has been talking to Hagans for a handful of months now. But he needs to get up here for an unofficial. They're going to work on that in May. We'll see where things go. It might end up just being official, but we'll see. My point, though, is just the fact that they are extending that board with 2 guys committed and a handful of guys that we expect official visits tells me that they're a little concerned about where they're trending with a couple of these guys. But, they, at the same time, they continue to dig and learn. And, if you find guys who are great prospects, and they seem to think that Hayden Moore and Brian Williams are underrated right now, there's no reason to not extend offers and continue that recruitment. So time will tell. Let's see where it goes.
So those are the main ones that stood out to me as far as the guys I was curious about. Are there any other ones that stand out to you on the list, or any guys we haven't mentioned yet that you want to bring up? Ryan first.
Well, I would say for Friday too, I also want to mention Jazeel Hart, pretty good cornerback prospect that, I felt like we talked about a good bit in the fall, then kind of wore off a little bit as we talk more about Kari Adams and Dorian Barney and some other guys. But Jazeel Hart's, firmly, I think, one of Terry Smith's top guys. I feel pretty good about that. Sean, would you agree with that? Like, is he? I don't know if I'd have him as Kari Adams and Dorian Barney, but he's in the mix, right? You think?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's a guy that has taken off for Michigan and Notre Dame, all those guys. So I mean, I think you can continue to add speed and length on the outside there. It makes a lot of sense. So
and he camped. Sorry.
No, you're good.
I'm bad at talking over you guys. I got to get better at that. My wife continuously tells me to stop doing that all the time. Maybe one of these days I'll learn, but until then, he camped at Penn State last year.
Say. You've got so many good quotes and ideas in your brain. So let it rip here.
I'm just a loudmouth more than anything. But anyway, Jazeel Hart did camp at Penn State last year, and that's important, right? So they have that quality information on him. Tennessee, Michigan, Virginia Tech official visits with him. It feels. I think Notre Dame's going to get an official visit. I don't know if it's been finalized yet. I've been trying to figure that out, but it does feel like Notre Dame, Michigan, Penn State. I mean, he's been open about that, and I would lean towards Michigan as Penn State's primary competitor there. Julian Peterson's obviously already committed. He will be back this weekend, by the way. Of course, as I said, Dorian Barney and Kari Adams, who, by the way, Kari Adams was just here on Monday. We didn't get into that. That's, a pretty important visit for Penn State, considering, one, his recruitment basically just restarted in January with so many new offers and all this new attention and all that. And then, two, the fact that he went to a lot of other schools in March and earlier in April. So it was big for Penn State to get him back on campus. But, he's another guy that I feel like official visits will really kind of paint the picture of where he ends up.
Fitz, are there guys that you want to highlight here after I almost fumbled the ball and just threw a question out into the universe without anyone's name attached? You got the second round pick. So,
yeah, I'm okay. It's going to be a good weekend. I think expectations for commitments. We're watching, but at the same time, it's not really the time period in the calendar because of official visits starting in actually less than a month, because Penn State's hosting that big weekend in mid-May. So nothing crazy expected, but they always like to surprise us. I will add Elijah Littlejohn, the linebacker from North Carolina, was up last at the end of last week, picked up an offer and set up an official visit. So another name to add to the linebacker board there.
And he continues to duck my calls, even though he says he's down to talk. I'm like, come on, man.
Just have your kids call him in the morning. I mean, that's.
By the way, Brandon Arrington has an official visit on May 2nd too. So we're 2 weeks away from a massive official visitor. I think he's the only guy that weekend. I hope he's the only guy that weekend.
Right. Wow.
But yeah.
You say May 2nd?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. That's very early.
I assume it's because of his calendar.
You just fit into the schedule when you can there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of those things where I don't know if he's a 5-star anymore, but he's in that realm, and he's one of the fastest prospects in the country with the size to back it up. He's a unique combination. Doesn't come along. It's interesting because we mentioned Kari Adams and Dorian Barney kind of at the top of that corner board, but Brandon Arrington, we don't even really involve him because he's just kind of a alien that's out in his own universe right now. So that one makes sense. Or it doesn't make sense for Penn State, but that one's one that you just throw your name into it and hope something happens. Penn State's in the top 5 or 6 there. Terry Smith in relationships, rinse and repeat there. I don't think they get him, but at the same time, to be in that mix for a California kid, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. They've been in the mix for a lot of these top corners over the years. The kid that went to Georgia, I forget his name, but he was the big, long, rangy corner that went to Georgia. They ended up getting AJ Harrison. That worked out for them in the class. But the ability to get quality players on the board is the first step, as you guys have always talked about. Fitz, we're going to get into some of the conversations in recruiting here in just 1 second to end the show, but this is a big deal. Like, this is the good stuff. Fitz put out his latest notebook over on the Blue White Illustrated message board, and you're going to get the notes and the information he's gotten from sources this spring, and you can check that out at bluewhiteillustrated.com. Of course, we're not going to talk about those details here on the show, but Fitz, can you tell us kind of generally, give us a promo of what you have over on the message board?
Yeah, Nate wrote a story yesterday. It was well received by some, others not so much. So I decided to punch back. And no, I mean, it's very funny. Nate and I have a unique relationship. He's one of my best friends, and hopefully I'm one of his best friends. But we write very differently. He's bigger words, me not use big words. So I decided to break that down and do a 10-point discussion about where Penn State stands coming out of spring ball. I hope people like it. It's gone pretty well so far in terms of the responses. And it's good to empty the notebook before we get to the blue-white game, because it gives you something else to look for when you're watching on Saturday. If you're watching in person, if you're trying to watch online, or if you're trying to watch on TV, you're out of luck. But if you're there in person, it gives you some things to work out throughout the roster, because there's a lot of asterisks that come with spring coverage. And we try to lay that out in advance, and people forget them sometimes, because a lot of it's young guys. A lot of it is guys that we will see in the rotation eventually, because a lot of the starters are not doing a ton. So you get a lot of your key feedback, and you get a lot of your sort of overall build to look at in these 3 weeks or these 4 weeks in March and April. So talked to Deion Barnes last night, and he was talking about the redshirt freshman group. And he's like, well, you bring them in last year. You think about this. You bring them in last year in June. Actually, some of those guys were here in January, but you bring them in last year, and you get 2 weeks to coach them up in preseason camp, and then they go to scout team, most of them. So how do you build from there? How do you coach them up to be better players outside of individual drills? Well, it's tough. So when they get into spring ball, this is like meat of the order type stuff for them. They have to be ready. They have to be taking these reps. They have to be growing. Even on the flip side, at offensive tackle, with Donka out, with Rucci out, with Egan Boyer out, you're getting all these guys different reps at different spots, and all this stuff matters in terms of the overall growth of the player. Well,
Yeah,
some of that comes onto the field in the fall, and some of that just you bank away for maybe next season, next spring, something like that. So it's important to understand the context of what you're looking at in the spring, because some of these guys that rise in the spring, you're not going to see in the fall. And I think we do a good job of outlining that. But I also think that there's a disconnect between mentioning names and aligning that with buzz, or aligning that with hype, as some will call it. So like you got to understand what you're reading. I think this latest notebook does a pretty good job laying that out. I hope, at least.
Yeah, I read it. I was very pleased to know what I know now based on your reporting. It's funny. Some of the things you just said were the question that I asked James Franklin yesterday at practice was, with all these veteran guys out, are there guys especially on the defensive side of the ball, that have shown up that maybe change your opinion on them, or any movement because of those things? And I'll tell you, he did a great job of giving words without saying a whole lot. So it feels like there's some overlap maybe in the conversation you just had there, unless I'm misreading what you're saying in terms of that. Anyway, before I trip and fall on my face, let's get to some of the conversations we've had here on the last couple of days since the last recruiting show. Ryan, you've been busy talking to a lot of the players and coaches and people around those commitments. So let's start with work backwards in time. Bill McGregor, Daryl Carey, his coach at DeMatha. What did he have to say about Daryl Carey? And
he's the next KJ Winston, Sean. That's what he had to say.
That's exciting.
We enjoyed that.
KJ
he's
Winston,
not quite
go
KJ.
Second round this week. T. Frank, is that where he's at? To the Eagles in the end of the second round?
Better not be the Eagles. I want him.
I would love that. I
better not be the Eagles. I'll be so annoyed if it's no, I'll be happy for Eagles fans.
He should stay home and play with the Washington Commanders, I feel.
Okay. He's not quite KJ Winston. I don't think he has quite the speed as KJ, but he is similar to Zachy Wheatley in a lot of ways. But just kind of reiterating, some of the athleticism. I didn't know he had a 6'4" high jump. I thought that was an impressive number. Shows explosion and things like that, and learn more about Daryl's background. He wasn't really a starter for them his sophomore year, so this was his breakout year. Originally DeMatha seriously considered him as a wide receiver. Basically, LeVar Keys, of course, another Penn State commit, had already started himself as a sophomore, as one of their upcoming guys. And they kind of played with the idea of him as a sophomore. He still played up on varsity. I'm talking about Daryl Carey now as a sophomore, but wasn't a full-time starter. And obviously DeMatha has a ton of talented players. So that's not a surprise or a negative of any sort of way. But, Daryl's been a top target for Dex for a while now. Sean did a good job of kind of learning that and highlighting that back in January into February. And we've had.
Can you say that again? Can you say that again?
Sean and I had this debate the other day of who discovered how important Daryl Carey was. Anyway, I'll give Sean the credit on that. And look, I think it's a quality pickup for Penn State. Good length, which I saw Eric's question above about height and all those things. That's always been pretty important to Dex. Now there also are the King Max of the world and other guys that they want to use in different roles, but that's certainly size and being physical is something that Dex really looks in guys and just put on Carey's film. I mean, there's plenty of physicality there, and that's a positive. So just kind of learn more about his background. That was the big thing. I didn't know quite how much he contributed as a freshman and sophomore. So I thought that was informative, and then just kind of learning some more background numbers and things like that.
Yeah, Eric asked this question. I don't know if there's a position. The answer is different by position. So Eric Eisler in the chat here says, is Penn State and most other teams placing too much emphasis on height? Don't want to knock anybody, but some of the other metrics don't always seem to be there. I would say at defensive end or defensive tackle, they absolutely do not care about height. Length seems to be a better value. Well, I mean, if you got most of the class being 6'2", 6'3", most 6'4", it's not like they're going after 6'5", 6'6" defensive ends, and like have a minimum requirement on those. If they're good enough to play at the position, height doesn't seem to be a barrier for them, in terms of the defensive line. Now, 5'11", different conversation, but like I would say,
a lot of 5'11" defensive tackles in the portal who are very, very productive at their level, and they're just not drawing a ton of interest just because I do think that it's not just Penn State. It's a lot of schools that have these unofficial barriers, I guess you would call them. Like they're not going to recruit a guy that's under 6'1" at defensive tackle, but all the stuff has to come together. You look at the length. Chukwara is the sixth different way I've pronounced it this show, and I apologize.
Chukara. That's how I'm going to say it. Chukara.
I was going to do a Wookiee growl, but I'm not going to.
He told me I did it well. We're going to go with that.
I'm glad you did. But
I like how you chirp it too.
He's 6'2". He looks taller in the photos, but he's 6'2", maybe just shy of 6'2".
He's actually a shade under 6'2".
Yeah. I don't know how he did it in the photos because he's taller than Franklin in those photos, but maybe he's standing on a block or something. Who knows? But 34-inch arms, man. Like that, the length is so important for these metrics that have seemed to work out pretty well, though. I mean, that's the thing. If they were bringing guys in and it wasn't working, like you got an excuse there. But it has worked out pretty well. You expand, and I think it kind of matters, position by position. But you expand a corner, and they brought in Kenny Woosley, who's 5'10", something like that. Xavier Thomas is coming in. I think he's 5'11". So they have taken guys that are quote unquote shorter, but they've got length to back it up. They've got other numbers that are very encouraging in terms of that. So I think it matters. It's a big game for big people. Like it's tough to get through it, to break through some positions. But
I guess where I was coming from, Fitz, is there are other schools and there are other places that have even higher thresholds of like, if you're not 6'4" at a certain position, or if you're not 6'2" at corner, like Penn State will take smaller guys at corner, or they'll play guys that are a little bit undersized, but height and length are totally, I don't want to say they're disconnected because they're supposed to be proportional, but if you find a guy who has 34-inch arms, I don't care if I do care if he's 5'11", but like if he's got that sort of length, that's the most critical factor. To me, the reason you want height is not just for mass, but for that ability to engage with your opponent and to win that initial contact, that hand fighting, whether it's at receiver or whether it's on the offensive line, all the way across the field. It matters at all of these positions because of what Fitz just said. It's a big game for big people, and you can create more power and more size with leverage and length. And so, like, I'm a big, I think it's critically important that if you're going to sacrifice one of those things, it's not that reach or that wingspan.
Right.
So
and it's,
to me,
and somebody just mentioned Will Campbell. I mean, the NFL does it too. Like this is not this is not a unique thing for Penn State staff. You look at Michael Troutman on the offensive line. He's 6'2", maybe a shade over 6'2", 33.5-inch arms for being that size. I mean, you can make that work. Sal Wormley had long arms. You've got a bunch of guys that you can go through that have had successful careers fitting that mold that maybe aren't the tallest guys in the world. But you're looking at the offensive line right now. Drew Shelton's 6'3", Venga is 6'4", 340, something like that. He's a big square.
Yep.
Nick Dawkins is taller center, 6'4". Cooper Cousins pushing to 6'6", and then the right side, Rucci's goes to 6'8". Donka's 6'6". Big people play this game.
Yep.
So that's kind of where I'm at with that.
So good conversation to kind of pivot into here. The last thing we'll talk about is you had a defensive tackle update recently at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Kind of gets into some of these things. I know we've brushed against a couple of these topics. What were the other things that stood out to you when you examined the defensive tackle conversation over the last week or so?
Yeah, I mean, it was a big day on Tuesday, right? They got a commitment. They had Joseph Mupoi went into the portal. He's another one of those guys that fits the mold of, hey, he's a big guy with length. See what we can make out of him, and nothing, So they do miss, absolutely. I'm not saying it's a catch-all, but that's college football recruiting. You look at Penn State's defensive tackle room. We talked about it a little bit earlier. You feel pretty decent about three guys once Alonzo Ford gets back, and then what happens after that? It's complete mystery because, and I think that's fun. I don't know that Penn State fans will feel the same way, but you've got certainly guys, Ty Blanding, Liam Andrews, DeAndre Cook, Owen Wafel, who we talked about earlier. So all those guys that can factor in, I don't think they're there yet. Like, I think that's a process that's going to be ongoing through preseason camp. Again, talent there, but you need guys ready. Like I keep saying, I feel really, really good about the 2026 defensive line. Okay, great. There's a season to play before that. How do those guys respond? How do those guys fill into the mix, fill out the rotation, be a guy that can give you 10, 15 snaps a game? How does that all work out for them? I don't know, because it's going to be a lot of growing up on the job. And that works sometimes. I think you can work with the schedule, right? You've got 3 non-conference games that give you an opportunity to get guys in the game. And then, oh, by the way, Oregon comes to town as game number 4. So it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out by week 4.
Ryan, final thoughts here. Get us out what may be coming up from you this week at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com.
Yeah, still working on the list. I mean, like I said, it's a little smaller than normal. And I do think it might be a little bit smaller than, sometimes some years we've seen like 100+ guys. Now, granted, a lot of them are friends of friends, high school teammates, all that. But my point with that is, also wouldn't be shocked if we see some surprises on the sideline just because of where we're at the moment and still kind of 48 hours out. Obviously, we're going to work on chipping away at as much as we can, but keep an eye out on the site, an hour or so before pregame, because I wouldn't be shocked if we see a couple guys that are, oh shoot, I'm texting Sean right now. Didn't know he was going to be here.
Yeah, and you can tune in for all of our coverage. If you can't make it to the game, not everybody can make it to the game. So make sure you check out BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Once again, thanks to Eric for the question in the chat and the donation to the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. Always appreciate people supporting us. And the best way that we can return the favor is subscribe here to the YouTube channel. Get yourself into our contest for a yearly subscription to the site, where we can then give you all this content, conversation, and interest for the next calendar year. And we'll be talking about the 2026 defensive line at this point next year. And Fitz can say, I told you so. Everyone's favorite thing to do.
I would never, ever, ever say that. Ryan, who discovered Darryl Carey?
Definitely me, but whatever.
Before a fight breaks out, we're going to get going. We'll be back with more this week. Tailgate Show coming up 1 p.m. on Saturday. Till then, we'll talk to you later.